Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Anna and I love making sourdough bread. I'm also somebody who loves to make things as easy as possible for myself. If you're familiar with making sourdough bread, you know that as part of the process, there is something called stretch and folds. That's where you stretch and fold the dough a couple of times over the course of a couple of hours. And as a result, you get a nice puffed up bread. And for quite some time, I've been wondering what would happen if I were to completely skip that step and just leave my bread on the counter to do its thing. Would I still get a nice puffed up bread at the end? Well, today I have finally decided to do a proper test and find out. So how I'm going to run this test. I will be making two breads. I will start by mixing all of the ingredients all together so they form the exact same dough. And then I'm going to separate that into the two parts. One I will do as I've always done with the stretch and folds over a couple of hours, but the other one I will just leave sitting on the counter for that same amount of time. I will then shape them, put them in my proofing baskets, and have them bulk ferment overnight in the fridge and bake them tomorrow. I have never done this. I'm filming this intro before doing the test, so I really have no idea how it's going to turn out, but I'm really excited to find out. So let's start. If you are curious about the exact amounts of ingredients that I'm using for this recipe, you can find those in the description of the video. But in short, I am using two types of flour, which I found gives me the flavor that we enjoy the most. So I'm using regular all-purpose white flour and then a smaller portion of whole grain, again, wheat flour. I'm then adding the salt, which I'm also measuring since I find that there is a specific amount of salt that I prefer in the bread, and then I'm adding cumin, which I'm just sort of eyeballing. I mix all of the dry ingredients together, and then I add the water and also my sourdough starter. So I'm no longer doing any sort of autolyse. I used to do that before. In case you're not familiar with what that is, that's when you only combine the flour and the water, and you let first the flour kind of soak up all of the water. You let it sit on the counter like that for maybe 30 minutes, and only then do you add the salt and the starter and combine everything together. But again, I found that it doesn't really have much of an effect on the end result, if any at all, and so I'm just combining everything together in one go. Once I have everything well mixed together in this one bowl, I transfer all of the dough into another one just to see how much of it do I really have, and to then be able to really split it into equal halves. So I'm keeping one half in one bowl, the other one in the other one. And what I do then, before letting them sit on the counter covered, I'm shaping them into more of a bowl shape, just by taking my hand and kind of cupping the dough, like stretching it underneath. And I guess I am doing a little bit of stretching with both of these doughs at this point. It's just to give it more of a form and a shape before I just let it sit on its own. I then leave it sitting on the counter covered with some tea towels for the first 30 minutes. After those first 30 minutes, you can see that both of the breads or the bread doughs look exactly the same. I mean, as they should. I haven't done anything different to either of them. And so I'm going to do the stretch and folds for that first bread. I'm using just a little bit of water to wet my hands, and I am doing something that's called the coil fold. That's when you kind of lift up part of the dough, fold it underneath, then you rotate it to the opposite side, do the same thing, and then do the remaining two sides. And it kind of forms, when you look at it from the side, it kind of forms this coil. When I am done with that, I again just cover both of the doughs up and let them sit on the counter for another 30 minutes. And then I just repeat the same thing. Once I'm done with folding the bread, I cover both bowls with the tea towels again and do another 30-minute wait before doing another set of stretch and folds. And as you can see, these stretch and folds, they are nothing super time consuming. I am done in literally under 2 minutes, and that's including me filming it. So it's really not a huge time commitment, but it does mean that you have to be present. Like, I can't just go out of the house for 2 hours if I have to do these stretch and folds every 30 minutes. I have to be there every 30 minutes to do this little job. So this isn't some huge amount of work, but it is limiting you in this sense that you have to be there every 30 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever to do something. After another 30 minutes, I'm doing the last series of stretch and folds. And here I think you can see a difference between the two doughs, where the one where I was doing the stretch and folds has more of these bubbles and bigger bubbles, whereas the other one kind of looks pretty much the same since I've put it into that bowl. There's maybe some bubbles appearing on the surface. Once I'm done with this last set of stretch and folds, again, let the dough sit on the counter for the last 30 minutes. So in total, it has been sitting on the counter for 2 hours. And after that, I am going to do the shaping of the loaves and putting them into my proofing baskets. I'm lining those with some rice flour. I just find that's the one that makes sure that the dough doesn't stick to the lining of the basket. So I'm using rice flour for that. And then just regular all-purpose flour for dusting my surface and then shaping the breads. And when we look at those two, again, you can see this big bubble in the middle of the stretch and fold bread, and also lots of small bubbles kind of all over it, whereas the other one, not really all that much going on. But I remember when I took the breads out of the bowls and I was shaping them, I remember being a little bit surprised that they both felt very, very similar. I was expecting the one where I did the stretch and folds to be kind of more smooth and maybe easier to work with, but it didn't really feel like there was much difference to them, to either of them. So that was an interesting thing to note. Once both the doughs are sitting in their proofing baskets, again, looking very similar to each other, I am covering them up with some plastic bags and putting them in the fridge to bulk ferment overnight. It is the next day in the morning and I'm ready to bake some bread. When I take both of them out of the fridge, they look pretty much the same, which gives me yet more hope that I'm going to achieve a pretty good result. Now, this is the part, if you want it to be really scientific and nitpicky, you could say that I'm introducing another variable into the test. If I really took a scientific approach, I would have to have 2 ovens side by side, preheated to the exact same temperature, running for the exact same amount of time, and bake the breads at the same time in those 2 ovens. But I'm just a normal human being and I have just 1 oven at home, so I'm not going to do that. I'm also not going to buy another one just for the sake of this test. So what I am going to do is first preheat the oven to 250 degrees Celsius. I will then have my bread, the first one where I did the stretch and folds, bake in the oven with my Dutch oven, which is preheating in the oven already. I'm going to bake it for 20 minutes. Then I decrease the temperature to 200 degrees Celsius and I take the lid off and do another 5 minutes in the oven to get a nice crust. Once that first bread is done, I will then again put the lid back on the Dutch oven, preheat the oven again to the 250 degrees, let it preheat, and then do the second bread where I didn't do the stretch and folds. So theoretically, the oven is running at different temperatures for different amounts of time, but I'm really hoping that this is going to have minimal effect on the end result. So let's see how they bake. This is my regular stretch and fold bread with a regular standard result that I'm used to. A nice crust on top, nicely puffed up, very happy with it. And this is my experimental bread where I did no stretch and folds whatsoever. I am very pleased with the result. I am pretty sure I'm never doing stretch and folds again. If you compare the two together, you can see that there is a little bit of a difference in size, but that's also because the proofing baskets were different. This one with the stretch and folds was a little bit bigger, the basket, so the bread is also a little bit bigger, but in terms of the volume going up, I mean, they're literally exactly the same. So I'm so happy with how it turned out. There is one more test that I need to do, or one more part of the result, and that is to cut into it and see what they look like on the inside. So again, as you saw, literally no difference for the inside whatsoever. This is the no stretch and folds. This is the classic stretch and folds. So I really don't see the point of stretch and folds. Of course, there is a possibility that I was just lucky, and despite not doing the stretch and folds, the bread turned out this nice, but I doubt that that's the case. But of course, I will be testing this more, or I should say I'll just switch my regular bread making process to this one to see if I'm getting consistently these kinds of good results. So I hope that this test was helpful for you to see, and definitely let me know in the comments, what are your results that you get when you do stretch and folds versus when you don't do them at all. Maybe some of you already knew this before watching this video, that you don't need to do stretch and folds at all. Let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video, which will be all about the sourdough starter. Bye.